When we're under the fight or flight nervous system, we have to get a super rush of energy, and the brain has to become super alert. We have to become super vigilant because there's an emergency. We're now in high gear. Now, you have 3 levels of beta. You have low-level beta. Right now, you and I pretty much are in low-level beta. If I said to you, listen, I'm going to test you on all this material, and if you don't pass the test, you can't leave tonight, you may move into a little mid-range beta. Well, high-range beta is like twice as high as mid-range beta, and that's when you're freaked out, when you're scared, when you're angry, when you're frustrated. And in high-range beta, it's like driving your sports car in first gear. And the brain begins to break down, and the patterns that you see on EEG readings become very incoherent.
Yeah.
So in high beta, you believe that the outer world is more real than the inner world. And in high beta, your brain is running a loop and you're overly analyzing your problems, and the analysis is causing the emotions to be reinforced. And when you begin to realize that in order for you to change, your brain has to move from beta to alpha. And in alpha, the inner world starts to become more real than the outer world. If you're addicted to those emotions, no new information can come into the nervous
like
system
a wall
that is not equal to the emotion.
Yeah.
And that's why when people get in this state, they get lost because they can't hear it, because it's not a time to learn. It's not a time for new information. It's time to react and survive. So when the emotions get highly addictive and the brain moves in this pattern, people are trying to force the outcome and use the ego to change their life. Now, moving into meditative states is moving into those alpha states where you begin to eliminate the information from the external environment. When you begin to slip back into alpha, your thinking brain quiets way down. Now, people do this all the time. They don't know they do it. When you're driving down the road in your car, and all of a sudden you're driving, and all of a sudden
somewhere just above Delta.
you're trancing out, and you're thinking
exactly.
about something, and you're not aware of your body. You don't see the road or the environment.
You lost track of time.
You lost track of time. Your brain moves from beta to alpha. We could say that in that moment, the inner world became more real than the outer world. The imaginary world became more real than the external world. Now, if you're in high beta, that never happens.
Right.
Because the brain doesn't pause enough to store information. You know, knowledge is the precursor to experience. The more knowledge you have, you're more prepared for the experience. And I think that when you go to these conferences, and this is why I kind of stopped doing a lot of the conferences and keynotes, because it's philosophy. Until you initiate that philosophy, until you initiate it and practice it, does it become truth or wisdom. So if people need to write that stuff down and ideomotor-wise create some circuits in their brain, and that's how they pay attention, then go for it. But don't sit there and analyze the information. And take the information and ask this simple question: how can I use this in my life? Now, once you start applying it, you just went from the philosopher to the initiate. And if you can reproduce an experience based on the knowledge you learn over and over again, now you're beginning to master that knowledge.
Yes.
You go from knowing all the way to knowingness. You know to knowing to knowingness. And when you get to that point of knowingness where you know that you know, or you know how, but you've done it so many times you don't even know how you know how, it's now innate in you. It's who you are. And that's where we need to go as a culture. We need to all of a sudden break from these philosophical arguments. I mean, that's why we're doing the workshops, because we're all about really, you know, it's a time in history not just to learn information. It's a time in history really to learn how to use that information.
Absolutely.
If you took 1 hour of your day and retreated from your life, truly shut off your cell phone, powered down the computer, you got up at 5 in the morning or whatever time is good for you before your day, when your brain is already in alpha and the brain chemistry is just right to dream, and you sat down and you said, what is the greatest ideal of myself that I want to present to the world today? And you sat there and you changed your state of being until you worked, until you were that person. You would have to forget about the people in your life, the things that you have to do, the things you own, the places you have to go at different times, and all the experiences in your life that reaffirm your identity, you would have to get beyond yourself in that moment. And when you become conscious of your unconscious self, you are less likely to be controlled because you're no longer being manipulated emotionally. So you can manipulate people with fear. You can manipulate people with need. You can manipulate people with lack. You can cause people to consume because they don't look a certain way. And so this indoctrination into this idea that you can rely on something outside of you to make you feel better is the exact way you control a culture. When you begin to transmute those survival emotions into elevated states, and the joy and the love for life is within you, you're more awake, and when everybody's looking one way, you're looking the other way, and you're no longer manipulated by fear. I mean, I went to an event in Santiago, there was 1,000 people in my audience, and half the people were wearing masks because of the flu, the avian flu. And I just said, you cannot believe that to be the truth. It's just not that way.
Right.
So you produce something in the marketplace that creates a little fear, that people think they have free will. They don't have free will. You think, oh, I'm going to choose Bayer instead of Excedrin. That's not free will. That's making choices based on knowns.
Right.
Free-willed individuals, genius, someone who steps outside a convention and who's willing to stay outside of convention until they produce an effect, and they go from being foolhardy and insane to becoming a mystic or a saint. But there's enough people in this world now that are beginning to wake up and see through the deceit and the greed and the competition that is not the model that's going to sustain a culture, because no organisms in nature survive in competition.
No.
They survive when they cooperate and they work together. And it's a time, this is a nodal point for us to begin to wake up. And so back to the original idea, we have to demonstrate that in every area of our life. And if you're changing you and I'm changing me and I'm giving up resentment and hatred and you're giving up jealousy and envy, and you're no longer in the fabric of your being, and people are noticing those changes, imagine the effects it has in the world. But we're not waiting for a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King or a Joan of Arc. This is a time when you and I, the simple person, has to be able to demonstrate it. And science is the language to really demystify it, and that's what unifies the culture and tradition and religion, because the moment you start talking about tradition or culture or religion, you begin to separate your audience. Science has become the contemporary language. In my house, when my kids were growing up, here's the rule. We had 5 seconds. If I asked you a question and you couldn't respond in 5 seconds, then you were addicted, game over. But when you're killing somebody or shooting somebody or blowing somebody up or whatever it is, there's a release of dopamine in the brain. It's the pleasure chemical. And when you squirt out all that, chemistry and norepinephrine, and you keep doing it, the receptor sites on the outside of the cells become desensitized. So the next time you play, they need a little bit more to turn them on. And so the pleasure centers in the brain start recalibrating to a higher level, and now you're addicted because you cannot get the same rush as you did the day before. Now, think about this. This is a tragedy because in the absence of that chemical rush, they can find pleasure in anything. Mm-hmm. You say, go watch a sunset, or let's go see your grandmother, or let's go take the dog for a walk. Well, they just murdered, a whole civilization in their video game. They're not going to find any pleasure in that. Now, learning should be a reward in and of itself. And if children now can't find pleasure in learning, and they have to wake their brain up just to turn it on, they're going to act out and get in trouble. And we have a culture now that's based on when they get older and have problems in their life, instead of facing off with the problems, they're going to look for something to make those feelings go away. The ego tries to change the ego functioning as more matter and less consciousness or less energy. Then it always becomes impossible because they can't get beyond the program in order to do that. And when we were studying in our workshop, when we were studying the first day where people were going back into their past and observing themselves, lighting a match in a dark place, it's important to do that. We saw just high-level beta patterns in the brain, and people were going for it. But they were able to really, really transmute that into something else. But the message was, that state is how you function every day, and you try to change you when you're a biological machine running as a program, and you're not the consciousness operating the brain and body, then you can't change it, and you'll just be left to the genetic program. Well, emotions are energy in motion. Right. And if you're experiencing the same emotion as the day before, then your energy is the same as the day before. And as long as your energy is the same as the day before, everything's going to stay the same in your life. You write down an emotion, let's just say anger or hatred. That emotion is connected to some person or something or some experience in your past. And you are energetically bound to that past event.
Yes.
So when you begin to look that this emotion that I'm having is keeping me connected to this past experience, and you begin to become conscious of how you think when you feel that way. Just write down how you think when you feel that way. Begin to notice how you behave when you're living by that emotion, and you begin to observe yourself. You will begin to denature that particular biological state. And the more you become familiar with it, and the word meditation literally means to become familiar with, the more you become conscious of, it means then you are transmuting those emotions, freeing them from the mind of the body. And people would say, well, I don't want to think about how I think when I'm that way. Well, everybody else can see you. You look at yourself through the eyes of somebody else.
Yeah.
So the observation process is the key. We ask people then, once they're clear on who they're being, to surrender that state of being to a greater mind. It will resolve it in a way that's right for you. And the true side effect of doing that properly is the elevated emotion of joy.